Please stand for the reading of the Gospel. The Holy Gospel according to John, the 6th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When the crowds found Jesus on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." They said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him who he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We're just making it through all the holidays this week. First the church's New Year's, and now Thanksgiving. It's a very jam-packed week. But as we have been getting to know one another over the past few months, I believe that many of you are realizing that I enjoy humor. It brings joy and energy, smiles and laughter, and much more. Humor is good. So, of course, I enjoy listening to comedians, watching funny movies, which I think a lot of people would call stupid movies. But I also like improv comedy. I like watching the camaraderie and the interactions that come from watching a group of actors on stage building on one another's stories, completely off the top of their heads. So it's this enjoyment of comedy that probably brought Kim and I, while we were on our honeymoon in Maine, into a comedy club one evening to watch some improv. It was a great evening, full of laughter. We got there a little late, so we were in the very back, seated. And towards the end of the show, as I was getting a little tired, we were listening to the folks on stage talk about needing one last situation that they could act out. I heard mention of something about a relationship. Like I said, I was starting to fade a little bit this evening. But all of a sudden, I hear Kim shout out, "We're on our honeymoon!" Well, next thing I know, Kim and the other couple at our table are pushing me out of my seat and towards the stage. So there I am, with the blinding lights in my face, telling a group of strangers the stories about how Kim and I met and got married, all from which they proceeded to act out our entire relationship. And trust me, when a group of improv actors gets a hold of more than one pastor, just look out. But the thing with all of that was, from the little bit of information they got from me, they got our story surprisingly accurate. They had been listening to what I was saying. They were figuring out who I was and who Kim was, and taking it from there as to who they thought we were together. It was enjoyable, it was hilarious, and like I said, it was pretty true. So just with anything else, there's rules that go along with improv comedy. And maybe some of you who have done this know better than I do, but there's probably a lot of rules of improv. But there are two rules in particular that seem to be the most important. The first rule of improv comedy is that you must agree. Improv doesn't get very far when one person gets up, gives a situation, and the next person jumps in and says, eh. For example, if one person says, "Stop, I have a gun," the other isn't going to say, "Well, that's not a gun, that's your finger." That's not going to go very far, and you'll miss the point, and the audience will probably start booing at some point. So again, the first rule of improv is you must agree. You must say yes. Now the second rule is not only do you agree, but you have to add to it. So not only do you say yes, but you say yes and. Again, because if one actor begins the story and the second person comes in and just says, yeah, it's not going to go anywhere. The next person has to agree with the first person, what they said, and build on it. Add their own piece of the story so it can keep growing. This is why not many people can be improv actors. It takes creativity and courage to say yes and. It's not easy, but it's what's required to keep the story going. It's why the actors got the story of Kim and I so spot on. They were listening, and they agreed with everything I said, and they added to it. So this stuff only works if you contribute and take part with me. You must say yes and. Can we try it? If I were to say, or if you were to say, I have the incredible ability to become invisible. If I were to say, here in Cole Camp, God is up to some amazing things. Excellent. So now you know the 2 rules of improv. And I'm sure you're wondering why, on Thanksgiving, we need to know the two rules of improv. Why, on this evening, when we gather together in this community of Christ, do we need to learn about saying yes and? But it's also on this evening that we hear about the crowds and the disciples who gather around Jesus on the edge of the sea. It's a story that follows Jesus, his miracle of feeding 5,000 people from a few loaves and fishes. It's a story about abundance and wanting more. The crowds are begging Jesus for more. Yes, we believe that our bread comes from God above, and we want more of it. Well, Jesus plays that same card back to those crowds. Yes, you can have the bread of heaven, and because I am that bread of life, you will never be hungry. Yes, and. So here we are in a season that's often filled with abundance, a season of giving thanks, a season of waiting and preparing, a season of celebration and love. We will be fed as we sit around tables with friends and loved ones, stuffed to the brim, barely able to move from the table to the couch. We'll be full, filled with love, laughter, and food. We'll be full from the challenges of maneuvering some of our family dynamics. We'll be full from all the organizing and planning and cooking and cleaning that we do, fed and full. But there's still some of us who won't be as full. We'll be saddened by an empty chair at the table. We'll regret a cutoff in a relationship with someone. We'll fail to fill the table with as much as we've done in the past or as much as we would like to do. We'll wonder how we'll survive until the next paycheck comes in. We'll be anxiously waiting for a diagnosis or a test result. Something might be missing. And yet, whether we're fed or we're full or just above empty, we're always going to be wanting more. We'll probably make our way to the fridge and see what leftovers might be there that we can eat before bed. Or we might stand in front of an empty fridge and looking just one more time and hoping to find something that we may have overlooked to fill that hunger. Just like those crowds who followed Jesus, we'll be asking for more. We'll be asking for assurance that Jesus is with us. We'll question Jesus about performing signs and miracles. We'll want to see it for ourselves, the works of God, and we'll ask the Lord, give us this bread always. But we always have to remember the rules. Rule number 1, agree. Enthusiastically, even amid your own doubts, say, yes. Yes, Jesus is the bread of life. Jesus is my bread of life. Jesus fills me when I'm hungry. He nourishes me when I'm thirsty. He walks with me into the depths of sadness and loss. Jesus meets us in our deepest hunger and need, in the depths of our darkness, and takes us to the other side where life overflows. And rule number 2, not only do we say yes, Jesus, but yes and. Say yes and in response to the bread that Jesus gives and the bread that is Jesus Christ himself. Believe in Jesus as the one who is our bread, the one who walks on water, who transforms water into wine, who heals the sick, raises the dead, and overcomes death forever for each of us. We say, yes, Jesus is the bread of life, and we are called to share in that life-saving, grace-filled, forgiving bread with the world. We have to say yes and. When you are full of the abundance gifted to you and your family, when you're full of the love and fed by the love of community, our response to God's love found in Jesus is yes. And I know that my abundance is to be shared with the world. When you're overwhelmed with scarcity and trying to make it day after day, we can still say yes. And I know that God uses what I have to offer and turns it into an abundance. A few loaves of bread to feed the multitudes. When the poverty of not only our brothers and sisters across the world screams at us, but the poverty of our neighbors across the street, our response to Jesus' call can be, yes, and I will welcome the least of these into my home, into God's church, and into our hearts. When a relationship ends, we hear Jesus and say, yes, and I know that nothing can separate me from the love of God. When you hear the words from a loved one that cancer has become a reality, we follow Jesus still and say, yes, and I know that Jesus is the healer of our every ill. When Jesus says, I am the bread of life, whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty, we can all say, yes, and you, Lord, are our bread of life. So this Thanksgiving, I pray that whether we're facing scarcity or abundance, we can be creative and courageous enough to say, yes, and. Thanks be to God. Amen.